welcome back to EnterTheRealWorld.com. This is There Will Be Movies, a podcast detailing some of our favourite movies of a given decade. This is Volume 1, so we're going to do the 2000s, 2009. My name is Matt Waters. I'm joined for this, as always, by Ben Phillips. Ben, how are you today?
I'm good. I stayed up till 1 in the morning watching one of the movies we're going to discuss today.
Well, you made your own scheduling choices. You had all week to watch these movies. If you would like to know the rules on how we came to these decisions and what sort of weird, wonderful caveats and rules we came up with, do listen to episode 0, available on EnterTheRealWorld.com, SoundCloud.com/Mike and Matt. It's all there. We'll try and make sure it's pinned prominently everywhere, just because we don't want to take 10 minutes to explain how we came up with this list every single episode. But that is there for you. This is episode 3. This is Training Day, which is another pick by me. Every time it's one that I put on the list, I feel incredibly defensive, because I'm aware that we left a lot of movies off our list in order to include some of our personal favourites, but they're personal favourites, so screw it. I like movies that are set in the course of a day. Like, I like gimmicky movies, you know, like this whole film takes place in real time, this whole film takes place in one day, this whole film takes place in one location, you know, that kind of shit.
So, yes, normally this movie does take place over one day.
Yes.
But there's one point where they just go for lunch, and then the movie's just like, and then they fell asleep for a little bit.
And the sun seems to go down a bit, but then there's still, like, a lot left of the day. Yeah. I'm not saying that's the only reason I like, that's not, like, why I put this on this list, because, you know, Go is a perfectly fine movie that came out, I believe, in the 2000s. It's just, that is something I generally like. I put it on because of Denzel. This performance as Alonzo is amazing. He got the Oscar. Yeah, just always something that I've always thought, man, that was a cool movie. I don't really have anything deep and meaningful to say about it. It's just, I think it's kind of fun, and I like Denzel in it quite a lot. Directed by Antoine Fuqua. Unfortunately, none of his other movies were even remotely in consideration for our list of this decade. Bait, Tears of the Sun, King Arthur. That was a bad version of King Arthur. Shooter, which is, in places, it's dumb fun. And Brooklyn's Finest, which I saw once and remember almost nothing about. But yeah, none of those were even remotely going to be on this list. David Ayer wrote it. I think this might be David Ayer's only good script, because fuck End of Watch, personally.
Of all the people we've had doing movies, and like obviously we've had scripts by very sketchy writers doing superhero movies, just because they do hire some bad people quite often for superhero movies.
Yeah.
David Ayer has not got a particularly strong...
No. Did Fury just get him a bunch of clout? Like, I don't particularly like Fury, but who knows?
I mean, Fury's probably his like best movie he directed.
Mm.
It has a stronger Rotten Tomatoes score, however that much that means, than this movie.
Well, fine.
But he wrote Fast and Furious, but like that is not the script that people really like Fast and Furious for.
People didn't start liking Fast and Furious until 3, and then 5.
Yeah, it's like 3. Everyone's like, but even then 3 was like a not particularly big movie.
3 was like a cult favourite. People were like, you know, that 3 is kind of alright, you know, and then people were like, yeah, whatever. And then 5.
Yeah, and then I saw 4, and I was like, this movie is so dull. I don't know how they're going to make this interesting again. And then I didn't see 5, 6, 7, or 8, and now it's the biggest franchise in the world.
I don't understand why it is. This is for another podcast that we will never make.
Justin Lin did it. Justin Lin, good director. We like him.
Okay. So this was released in October 2001. So Ben, why don't you... we have a new year now. So 2001, a new year. Why don't you contextualise that one for us?
In 2000, the highest grossing movie of the year was Mission Impossible 2. We start to see a shift in tides towards what Hollywood looks like now with the new box office top 10. So this is the worldwide top 10 for 2001. At number 10, we've got Hannibal, which is bad.
Yeah.
Number 9, we've got Planet of the Apes, which is bad.
Yeah.
Number 8, we got Jurassic Park 3, which is bad.
Yeah.
Number 7, The Mummy Returns, which is fine.
It's not good.
Number 6, we've got Pearl Harbor, which is bad.
Yes.
Number 5, we've got Ocean's 11, which we may be discussing imminently.
Yes. Mark Wahlberg dropped out of Ocean's 11 to be in Planet of the Apes, by the way. Solid decision.
And then we get the top 4, which is kind of like the top 4 that kind of change where cinema goes. At number 4, you've got Shrek, which obviously completely fucks over how you cast voice talent for animated movies going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, you've got Monsters, Inc., which isn't high-level Pixar, but you start to see Pixar's dominance with, like, after Toy Story, Bugs Life, and Toy Story 2.
I like Monsters, Inc.
Number 2, you've got Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. They're kind of big movies, I think.
Maybe. I've heard something to that effect.
And then number 1, a little tiny movie called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone,
Wow. Harry Potter did better than Lord of the Rings. Wow, okay. I mean, I guess you got that family audience, but yeah.
Harry Potter was huge.
I mean, I know that, but it still kind of shocks me that Harry Potter beat out both Shrek and Lord of the Rings.
I mean, this is worldwide. Let's have a look at domestic and see whether or not there's a shift.
Yeah,
no, Harry Potter is still number 1. You go domestic.
Wow.
Shrek does outgross Monsters Inc. at domestic low. Number 5 is Rush Hour 2 though.
Oh man!
So that is the shape of like the popular movies in 2001. As for Oscars, you have Moulin Rouge, which we did have in contention at one point, I believe, for the list.
Again, you could have pushed harder for some of your favourites.
I could have pushed harder. Lord of the Rings: Fellowship of the Ring was nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah.
I don't think they're ever going to go all the way, though. I don't think. I don't think that franchise will win the many Oscars.
No.
In the Bedroom, Gosford Park, and then the winner, the quite frankly awful A Beautiful Mind, which was never in contention for this list. And finally, we'll contextualise it with actual good movies that came out in 2001. Mulholland Drive, which I could have fought for.
You gave it a rugged go.
I did, but I watched it. It's really good, but no.
There are a ton of movies where we're like, this is good, but I don't particularly want to talk about it on the podcast. So it's like,
Yeah. Spirited Away, which was on the list.
We'll cover Spirited Away in a different podcast. That
in a different
make no
podcast.
fucking sense to most people except Ben's beautiful mind.
No, I don't have a beautiful mind. Okay. It's a bad movie. AI, artificial intelligence. We decided another Spielberg movie, even though AI is really good. Ichi Mama Tambien, which I adore, but again, I prefer another Cuarón movie from this decade. Amelie. Oh God, again, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring keeps coming up.
Weird.
People think it's good. This is the only movie that is on the highest grossing, the most acclaimed, and on the Oscar list. Moulin Rouge is like just underneath it on the most acclaimed list, but like Fellowship of the Ring is the only movie that hits the trifecta of all three of these things. But the movie we're discussing today, as you said, is Training Day, which came out in 2002, February 1st in the UK.
Sure, but 2001.
But 2001 for like music, because we're being very confusing with how we're doing this. But the order we're doing it is because this came out in the first weekend in February in the UK. Opening weekend in the UK, it grossed about £1 million or $1 million because everything's confusing.
That's cute.
Yeah. I mean, but it's that whole thing where like we're going to release a movie set in South Central LA in February in the UK.
Yeah.
It's kind of an Oscar player, but not really.
Sure.
But it opens behind Shallow Hal and Gosford Park. Number 2 is Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring.
Of course.
Of course, because it will be on every list that we discuss. But number 1 is Vanilla Sky.
Ooh. We already did Cameron Crowe, so that's fine.
We already did a Cameron Crowe. But yeah, so that is the year that is contextualisation for the UK. Training Day, not the best opening you could hope for this movie, but it makes sense in that the UK does not have the kind of relationship with this kind of culture that America does.
No. Well, while it didn't make a huge amount of money in the UK on its opening weekend, it did make $104.5 million at the box office in general against a $45 million budget. So a modest hit. Our first of those so far, because Memento, tiny budget, didn't do all that well, and Almost Famous was a commercial flop. So there's that. David Ayer wrote a first draft of this in like 1995, which was actually a few years before the Rampart scandals went fully public, and the character of Alonzo was originally going to be of Latino persuasion, which is a nod to Rafael Perez, who was very involved in all that, and Denzel Washington actually fashioned his look slightly after Perez, so there's that. Davis Guggenheim was set to direct with Samuel L. Jackson and Matt Damon as the stars, but then when Denzel Washington secured the role of Alonzo, he basically quietly said, "Can we replace this director, please?" And you got Antoine Fuqua. Bruce Willis was also considered for Alonzo. But far more interesting, I think, are the people who were considered for Jake Hoyt. Christian Bale turned this down. Eminem turned this down, so he can make 8 Mile. And when you consider who else is in this, namely Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Macy Gray, they almost had that trio of rappers there. Mark Wahlberg was considered, as he is considered for fucking everything. Tobey Maguire tried really, really hard to get cast as Jake Hoyt, and he actually did 2 months undercover with a cop and stuff, and gained a bunch of weight to try and man up for it. And the second Ethan Hawke became available, they were like, no, bye. bye. Anton Fuqua wanted to cast Mickey Rourke as Roger, but that went to Scott Glenn. Go to IntoTheRealWorld.com and listen to Countdown to Destruction, where you can hear me and Ben talk about the wonderful show that is The Leftovers and all of our thoughts on Scott Glenn.
Did you have the realization that you knew who Scott Glenn was in the middle of the podcast?
Yeah, kind of, because obviously I remember this character of Roger very vividly. I was like, he's this kind of like old but kind of cool white dude in a vest, and like that's very memorable. And then I'd seen him as Stick in Marvel, and it was like, this is a completely different human being. No twigging that it's the same person. But then I knew that Stick was in The Leftovers, and then when I was watching The Leftovers, I was like, he's in fucking Training Day. And yeah, that all snapped into place for me very nicely. And like, the legacy of this movie is Denzel's, Oscar win, which was a big surprise because Russell Crowe was winning everything heading up to Oscars for Beautiful Mind. And weirdly, like, Denzel was submitted for Best Leading Actor while Ethan Hawke was submitted for Supporting, but Ethan Hawke is actually in the movie for longer than Denzel is.
I mean, Denzel Washington is first billed.
Yeah, it's the big, sexy performance. The movie is sort of all centered around him. And it worked out for the best because it's like, he won, Ethan Hawke didn't. Denzel is, to this day, the only two-time African-American winner.
He's the only two-time African-American winner who's won lead actor.
It's also the first time that a black actor won for a movie directed by a black director. So there you go. Let's talk about the movie, though. So the first act, very much just sort of learning who these people are, and right from the off, the sort of intensity of Alonzo sitting in that diner as Hoyt is sitting there sort of nervously jabbering away at him, and he's just like, all right, tell me a fucking story. If you're not going to let me read my paper, you have to tell me a story. And you learn a lot about both of these people immediately, and like his whole thing of like going along with the story and being a little bit playful, and then just being like, so you were like riding around with this woman for a year and this is the best story you have, and it's like, oh, so that's where your priorities are. And just, he's intimidating immediately and charismatic as fuck when his whole thing about, pay the bill, like your dick's in the middle, your pockets either side, reach into one of them, pay the bill, boom, here's Alonzo, and then driving off to Still Dre and all this shit. And I think they do a really good job. They kind of hit you with this 1-2 punch all the time of, he's wildly unprofessional and kind of a dirtbag, but then he will follow that up with like, right, here are all the like hours of prison time I've dished out, here are all of the officers I oversee, here are all the cases I'm currently investigating. And it's like, they're not trying to say like, oh, but he is a really good cop. It's not that he's just a wildly corrupt like criminal with a badge type thing. Like, he is also on some level like engaging in police work, and he is at least knowledgeable about what his job should be.
I do kind of wish that they had done more to show his actual good police work, because like, obviously the movie goes a long way to like, he just kind of states all his stats, but we don't actually get a chance that every single time that they do something to do with police work, it's kind of over the top, or he lets them go at the end, or all these kind of other little things. I just kind of wish there was that like opportunity where they had like the one legal unquestionable kind of like good bust. It's just, you get the scene where with the kids, the college kids, where he scares them, and the attempted rape, and he scares them, and it's like, I wish one of these they decided to turn into like a legitimate, he does good cop work, just to show it a bit more balance. But I mean, as you say, like, Denzel Washington is such a force in this. Like, this is the first movie that we're discussing that is so fundamentally like an actor's movie, because I mean, like, the last two movies that we've done, Memento and Almost Famous, both got screenplay nods. They're both very much like the director's vision, whereas this movie is so dominated by Denzel, it's insane. Like, he kind of overpowers everything else.
I'm sure it wasn't written to be a star vehicle, but that is what it ended up being. It's like, come to see Denzel, and like, if you enjoy anything else in it, good for you, kind of thing.
I mean, this is kind of where they cement Denzel will get Oscar nomination. It doesn't really matter what the role is. I mean, because a couple of years ago he got that nomination for Roman J. Israel Esquire, and it's like, no one fucking saw that movie, but he got an Oscar nomination for it, which is insane. But this movie just cements him so much as like the preeminent African-American talent. Whether or not you think he's like the best actor or the actor most deserving of it is a different question. Like, he is a force of nature in this movie.
You get like the power play shit with him making Jake smoke. A good narcotics officer should know narcotics and like, should have them in his blood, and he makes Jake like smoke weed. He literally holds a gun to him, and then after he does it and he complains about it, he's like, you're an adult, it's not like I put a gun to your head. But then he gives him the smile, so it's like, one of the things I do like about it, like, it isn't necessarily the tightest script in the world, but there are 3 or 4 instances where they really foreshadow things and things do come back to pay off, and I think that's necessary if you're going to have a film set over the course of one day like this and like the intensity of where this goes. So like him getting him high now is clearly a premeditated thing to help him out much later, but you wouldn't know that at this point. So at the time it's just like, oh, look at this power play, like he's just testing him and making him do dumb shit just to see if he'll do it and all this, but I do appreciate that about it.
The moment that he starts to kind of like space out, and it's like, oh, he's not spacing out in a weed way, he's spacing out in a something else.
It's laced with PCP is the
but you get this long list where like Denzel Washington just lists the different names for PCP, and
didn't
that
you like to get wet though.
That line shouldn't work, but Denzel makes it work. But it's such a thing where like I'm sure in the script it's just like, why are you listing these like 8 names for this drug? There's a reason that David Ayer wasn't nominated for Best Screenplay nomination this year.
Yes, Denzel is either he's improvising a lot, he is taking bad lines and making them work, and it's entirely about him. You mentioned you wish that they had more of showing Alonzo as a good cop kind of thing, and the closest they really get is so that he takes Jake to see Roger, Scott Glenn. You know, he remembers him as a high school football player, and like he is impressed by his little fucking bullshit thing about smiles and cries while he's high. But the interesting things here are, one, they allude to the trouble with the Russians, that is alluded to like 2 or 3 times before we fully understand what it is. But the other thing is, he claims that Alonzo used to be a lot like Jake, and he used to be very enthusiastic and very like heroic and all this stuff, and there isn't enough evidence, but I think that's the closest they get to what you're talking about, where it's like Alonzo used to be a fully righteous man who was just out there trying to stop every crime and was leading with his heart and not his head and stuff like that. And it's like, what they're trying for is, you know, he has a cautionary tale, and like he got too deep into his... I think Denzel has even phrased it as like he got too good at his job almost, and he ended up becoming more extreme than these people he's taking down. But
you get the line later on in the movie where he's just like, do you want them all to kill themselves? And he says like, let the animals sort it out. Like he doesn't view them as people, which I mean is interesting in terms of like, so we're going to start this. Do you think this is a pro-cop movie?
Yeah, kind of, because Jake is so like him like taking his badge and being like, you don't deserve to wear this, and like him being the good cop that everyone likes while Denzel is the crooked one. It's like, I feel on some level it's like we like cops, but this one is not great. But I don't know, but then there is that corruption with the 3 wise men.
There's so much corruption in there because all of his team are bad, the 3 wise men are bad, and they obviously hold a lot of sway. Is this movie saying this is a fundamentally corrupt or compromised?
I think it's that thing of like acknowledging that there is corruption, but then trying to give you that hope that like there are some good ones out there, and this is what
there are Ethan Hawkes in the world who are fighting for.
And I don't know if it's just like, obviously there have always been tensions with police, particularly in the area this is set.
I mean that's what makes it interesting, is like they got permission to film in places in this movie that no previous film had permission to film before.
Sure.
And I think that's interesting in terms of just considering like the people in this movie, like Dr. Dre has a song called Fuck the Police. And like
Ice Cube has played so many fucking policemen at this point, like fuck that shit.
Sure, I'm not saying they've got the most integrity in the world in terms of what they're doing, but like it is interesting that this is the movie that breaks down a lot of those borders. I don't know if is it because it's the black director and the black actor in the lead role, but this is something that understands where the people in this movie come from. But then this movie definitely isn't about like the socioeconomic reasons behind why the world is like it is. It's very much like this is a cool, fun kind of crime movie.
I would say that like if you'd asked me that question a few years ago, I probably would have answered slightly differently, but because the whole hey, cops are bad thing has gone a lot more global in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, I'd say. I now view it through when I look at their like holier than thou Jake, who is like righteous and pure and wins everyone over, that does hit me a little bit differently than it used to, and it does feel a little bit like propaganda-y. But like as you say, there is a great deal of hey, look how bad the police are. So I don't know, that's an interesting one, I would say. I don't think it particularly comes down on either side, which is probably for the best, but there's definitely elements elements of both.
Yeah, it's not like the movie just kind of goes like, at the end of the day, they purged all the bad police from the police force, and it was a good day.
So, we talked about the stopping of the rape, and like they were just talking about how like Roger said how he used to be like him and used to like be more heroic. The next event is they are, and this is possibly the biggest thing to happen in the movie. It saves Jake's life, for one thing. They are driving along, and Jake witnesses a girl being potentially sexually assaulted in an alleyway, and he makes Alonzo pull over so he can intervene. Alonzo just watches him in this 2-on-1 beatdown, and he wins, and then he walks in. And Alonzo, this is police brutality, and he lets them go, which Ethan Hawke has that big, starey, like, dramatic moment. And, they establish his catchphrase of, you want to go home or you want to go to jail, and he does his whole talk about big fish and little fish, and it's an interesting one. And like I said, like I like that this ultimately ends up paying off, and like Jake's decision to be that cop that wants to put out every fire ends up benefiting him. Whereas if this had been Alonzo and he'd driven past, Alonzo would have been dead in that bathtub later on. But Denzel in this scene, like all the dumb shit he's doing with the guns, like scraping them together and all that, all improvised, all kind of great. Like it's dumb.
It all looks so dumb.
Yeah, but it's great though.
It's like it was almost like a point where he's not holding them properly. I'm like, why are your hands kind of like bent at the elbows when you're like holding the guns? Yeah. But he does look intimidating. I do find this is the first time you get, like, obviously Jake has smoked the PCP laced weed at this point, but this is the first time that he does something illegal, because he does that chokehold.
Yes, they didn't teach you that in the academy, did they? And he's like, I was getting my ass beat. And he's like, and you did what you had to do. It's like, okay,
it's that kind of thing where like he's trying to say to him that it's like, in these circumstances, sometimes you have to do things that are questionably illegal.
You using that chokehold is the same as me, like allowing a murdering drug dealer to like pass me information about other people.
This is a good time. Like, what do you think about Ethan Hawke's performance in this?
I think it's perfectly fine, but not noteworthy.
I
don't think there are. I have seen a lot of these kind of movies. Like I have seen SWAT, I have seen Brooklyn's Finest, all this kind of shit. There are actors who kind of are cringy in these moments, and like you can tell they probably aren't a huge fan of the script or something, and it feels off. He doesn't look or sound uncomfortable, and a lot of times he is like the whitest man alive, surrounded by a lot of quite surface level still, but black culture, and I think he's fine. I don't think he like sticks out or anything, but I also don't think he's oh my god, Ethan Hawke, what a performance for him.
I mean, so much of this is him reacting to stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
And he reacts well. It's just obviously up to this point, like probably his best role before this was Before Sunrise, which is this like independent romantic comedy that ultimately ends up spanning decades. But I just can't imagine looking at him going like, yes, from Before Sunrise, Ethan Hawke, we should get him to be.
Was this like his... Ethan Hawke could kind of be like a lead action type star in a medium-sized movie.
This is when they started trying it.
Yeah.
He's done some big things beforehand, but obviously after this he's got stuff, Assault on Precinct 13, and like Daybreakers is like a few years or like 8 years after this, and he's doing kind of more of these roles, and it's interesting that people think that this is what Ethan Hawke's good at, and maybe it is because he is fine in this movie, and he does play off of Denzel really, really well, but I just can't imagine going from this.
He's good at laughing and sort of being a dickbag, but with decent enough intention.
I mean, it feels so much to me kind of like what they do with Colin Farrell, which is like they keep on trying to push Colin Farrell into these like big budget action movies as like the lead actor, and it's like no, I want them to do the weird little comedies and independent movies which are dramatic and stuff like that. Not
fucking Bruges.
I don't need Total Recall Colin Farrell. I want in Bruges Colin Farrell.
We hear at this point a lot of Alonzo's troubling views about criminals and poor people, and protecting the sheep by going after the wolves, but having to be a wolf yourself and all this shit, and quoting all these hours of jail time, but then he does say, no matter what I say, you did the right thing. And like, do you think that's a sincere comment by him, or is he just trying to manipulate and get him back on side?
Maybe a bit of both, because obviously like later on in the movie you do get him saying things that obviously don't mean shit, and the movie does play it off like he looks sincere when he's doing it, so it kind of does shade everything else he says in the movie when he does do these little moments of apparent sincerity that you kind of go like, how long has he been playing the game that he ends up playing for this whole day? Like, does this involve that, or is he letting his own previous ideals kind of like break through for a second? Yeah,
exactly. And I don't think we ever really get an answer about that, and that's entirely up to each individual person, but you could take it both ways, I guess. So Jake botches hilariously botches trying to buy drugs from Snoop Dogg, who is a drug dealer in a wheelchair wheelchair called Blue, and they chase him down, and Alonzo shoves a pen down his throat to like make him throw up all these little bags of drugs and threatens him with prison time until he gives up the name of the supplier, who's called the Sandman. They go over there with a Chinese takeaway menu, which they are flashing very quickly and pretending is a warrant, and Alonzo essentially robs this drug dealer of $40,000, and then they have to flee the scene as there's a big shootout. And this is Macy Gray's big scene, and this character really sticks with me, just like those nails and like the voice and like all the like fucking cussing out the cops and everything. And this is a moment where, I said how Jake doesn't feel like incredibly embarrassing here, but the little fist bump he does with the kid, by the way, will grow up to play the young version of Zuri in Black Panther. It's Denzel Whitaker. That little fist bump is cringy as fuck, but I think that's on purpose. Like, I think they do play with his whiteness at times. I don't think it's immediately apparent what's going on here, because you don't really learn that he stole until a little bit later, but like they've gone there ostensibly to try and find this load of drugs, and you kind of know something's not right because of them gaining entry unlawfully and like him making Jake wear a jacket that says police on the back and then leaving as quickly as they came and all that. And like, I just remember this for Macy Gray and that awkward fist bump generally.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think Macy Gray is actually kind of good at doing that. I don't know how to describe it, like addict kind of strung out person.
Of the three musicians, I think she's clearly the best.
Yes, I do think she is clearly the best. The thing I don't get is like how many of these people know Denzel or know Alonzo when he shows up, because obviously we get certain lines like in the movie where like some people are just like, oh, it's this dickhead again coming in.
Yeah.
But like, is he aware of Sandman? Is Sandman one of his...
When you start to question things like, he says how he is basically the one that put Blue in the wheelchair, and this all ultimately bleeds into his plan, and it kind of feels like the entire thing was orchestrated, and he knows that Sandman is someone who... Because the whole point is Sandman's actually in prison, and they're searching his house, and it's like, clearly a guy who is currently in prison is not a threat to be distributing drugs right now. So it's like, yeah, it does feel like a big setup, but certainly Macy Gray doesn't know who he is.
Yeah, I'm wondering how entrenched in this world, because if he's supposed to be undercover, he's not particularly good at being undercover.
No.
That's the thing, is like all these drug dealers know him by sight. He wears plain clothes, but it's like you're not exactly going to be doing stings and pretending to like buy drugs and stuff like that if you rock up. And like, that's the other thing, that when Jake tries to buy the drugs off of Blue, Denzel is sat in the car next to him. Well, obviously he knows that you're not here to buy drugs if he recognises the other fucking police officer in the car.
But like, then is that just a hole in the script? Is that something Denzel just like improvised, or like Anton Fuqua like fed to them during the shootout just to like make it a little bit more dramatic or something, and it's just script inconsistency? Or is it just like literally a setup of like him going to Blue earlier and being like, right, I'm going to bring this white boy by tomorrow, we're going to do this? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I just find it interesting is that I don't get how because obviously he says like, I've got people on the ground kind of like feeding me information and stuff like that, and he obviously has a network. But he's not particularly subtle about it, and maybe that is kind of like part of his downfall, is that he kind of gets too big for it and kind of is showing his face in places that he really shouldn't show his face.
Yeah, and the entire idea at the end is like he's gotten too cocky and he's made one too many mistakes, and he's assumed he's going to get out of it, and he can't.
Yeah.
I've sort of said this is where we shift into Act 2, when Alonzo takes him to the jungle, not literally, the area they call the jungle.
Why didn't that song play? That would have fit in with this movie really well. Bit of Guns N' Roses.
Harry Cruz, flipping pigeons. He takes him here so he can bang his mistress, Eva Mendes, because he says up front, I'm married, I've got however many sons, like if you need to have a son, just let me know, I can't miss, and all that. And then he just openly in front of Jake just takes him to his mistress's house so he can bang her, and like...
I very much appreciate, this is the kind of movie that could conceivably have the scene where Jake sat there watching TV with the kid, and like the picture starts shaking and he has to like cover the kid's ears and stuff like that. I'm glad we don't get that scene. We just kind of like fade out, the sun moves in the sky a little bit, and Alonzo comes to wake them up, and it's like, oh good, we're not going to make this into a comedy bit. This is just, he's gone to like bang his mistress in the middle of the day.
It feels like a power move. Jake having to sit there and like being brought food and told he can watch cable like he's a child while he's hanging out with the kid. Like, it all feels kind of like Denzel just sort of asserting his power over him or whatever. But then this is another thing where this moment that Alonzo probably meant as he's either acting self-assured initially, or he's trying to lord it over Jake on some level, but this ends up coming back to bite him because this bonding that Jake does with the kid will pay off a bit later on.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I do appreciate about this movie, is that, like, at the end, everything does kind of slot into place.
Yes. It's the sort of ancillary side details where it's a bit like, hang on, though. But the big stuff does genuinely line up. You spoke about how they had to get permission to film in certain places. This is one of them. They had real gang members here. And the guy, I think he's called Bone, the character who does most of the talking. He's kind of like a gang movie liaison. And like he's become like a documentary filmmaker and stuff like that. But he is the one that secured them the permission to work in a lot of these neighborhoods. And his negotiation tactic was, I want real gang members to be in your film. And apparently everyone was really, really nice to them and very accommodating. So that's all great and lovely. But it does sort of give this a level of authenticity to some degree where, you know, you see some movies where you get these just such generic like gangster type people, and there's a guy in this movie later on who I feel he's been in literally a dozen movies as Latino gangster, but I feel it does work, and like this area does feel dangerous, especially to me, a middle class white person, so that all works.
I would not go there.
No, there you go. But then I wouldn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I do have a question.
Sure.
So what is David Ayer's kind of relationship to this area? Because obviously, like, he writes a lot of movies that are kind of LA set,
sure,
featuring the police force, and I'm just intrigued, as like he wasn't born there, was he?
I don't think so. I don't know. I'm sorry, Ben. In my research for this podcast, I have chosen not to do a deep dive into the life and times of David Ayer.
He is just one of those guys where it's like, because obviously he is white, and I'm just wondering, like, apparently he did move to LA, and he did have experiences in South Central Los Angeles, but it does kind of, is this kind of fetishistic? Is this him trying to draw attention to a thing that he thinks is underrepresented? I'm not sure. It's just interesting that David Ayer is the guy who writes this genre of movie.
He's written this movie more than once. Like, End of Watch is suspiciously like Training Day.
But he ultimately, he keeps coming back to this but it's just one of those things where, like, he's not the person who obviously got them permissions to do this stuff. It feels like everyone else in this movie is the person that got them permissions to do what they do. Don't have a point. It's just
it is interesting. No, they go to meet the three wise men, Harris Yulin, Tom Berenger, and Raymond J. Barry, who we were talking before we started recording, like, this feels like something that should be, because all these guys have played cops in the past, some more famously than others. It kind of feels like this should hit harder than it does, of like, oh shit, look at their like cool little cast of the high-ranking policemen, the legendary cops who have all this power, and it's like, I feel to the average moviegoer, you don't know who at least two of these three men are. Tom Berenger is probably the most famous of the three, but even him, it's not like he's like a huge name to people in the year 2001 onwards, but
it feels like it should be people like something like a Dennis Farina, or like people who are like so frequently cops, or like famous for cops, even if it's like TV cops or anything like that, but it feels like they should be going for that kind of archetype.
Someone who played a cop on a big TV show for like 10 years or something.
Exactly.
Know, like, should it have been Michael Chiklis before The Shield had even been made? Who knows?
I mean, like, that's the kind of thing that you probably would do nowadays. Like, if you made this movie nowadays, you probably would go like, oh, let's get Michael Chiklis to sit on this table and be like the corrupt cop who's managed to weasel his way up the chain of command in the LAPD. Like, it's just, it feels stunt casty, and I don't know if that's because this is the kind of scene that nowadays would be so stunt casted, that back in 2001 doesn't need to be.
And maybe they weren't even attempting to consciously do that, but who knows. I do appreciate about this scene where Alonzo like trades his stolen money for an arrest warrant. We get more allusions to the Russians, and like, you know, oh, you should get out of town and you're a dead man walking and all this sort of stuff. I like that they kind of make Alonzo look a little bit silly. After every minute of this film, he has been like the undisputed king of his domain kind of thing, and like no one scares him, he's intimidated of no one, he always feels in control, and you see a little bit here where he is made to look the fool and he has to sort of play nice and kiss ass to these people, and I think that is kind of interesting. Like you said, I do kind of wish they'd explored more of this kind of duality of him and like had more stuff with his how he used to be and that kind of thing. But it is nice to see for a moment the facade kind of come down where the three of them are kind of laughing at him and he's the one that's having to kind of kiss some ass. And they, you know, he hints at the stuff with Roger, and he's like, "Oh, I'll tax my first account," and he's a security risk anyway. And I don't know if they outright tell you it early on, or you're meant to just infer it before the reveal with Roger. But like, do they like outright say this dude's a drug dealer? Like, I know he like answers that phone that looks very like a burner phone that one would use, and he's just sitting. I don't know. He kind of looks like a criminal, but
I don't think they ever say. But I do think it is heavily implied. They walked into his house and he sniffs the drugs. drugs, I was like, I don't know what this man does, but he's definitely someone who's in the criminal world. And even if he's only dealing weed.
So the studio wanted this scene to be cut, apparently, and Antoine Fuqua insisted on keeping it because it was important to him to show that Alonzo is not one rogue cop, that it's known and tolerated. Because these three, we don't know precisely their job titles, but they clearly have a lot of sway, and it's sort of, he wanted it to be clear that there is a higher level of corruption and Alonzo is known about and tolerated. So when you were asking earlier about, what stance is this taking about cops, something like this very much comes against the cops, like, I don't know if the studio wanted to take it out because of that. I think they thought it was just boring, but it is interesting.
It's interesting because I can't imagine taking this scene out because it just kind of explain all the moves that happen in the second half of the movie, which makes it bizarre to pull it out. It goes like, and then they just go bust Roger's house?
Well, I'm sure they would have come up with some weird...
Sure, it's just bizarre that they would go from like...
Yeah, I think they were just like, no, we don't want these three white men in a like gentleman's club smoking cigars and like giving him a warrant. We want more like on the streets, like, I don't know. They assemble Alonzo's little team of dudes, which include Dr. Dre giving a frankly terrible performance, and that dude that's always like a henchman on a criminal crew, I don't know his name, but they siege Roger's house, they take a percentage of... He has a huge amount of money buried under his kitchen, which they dig up and they divvy out. Jake is not into this. Like, he's visibly shaken when they storm the place, but then he sort of remains professional. But then when they start handing the money out, he's like, well, we can't do this. Like, I'm not taking it. And, Alonzo's like, I'll hold on to your share.
Does he know that they're going to Roger's house?
No, definitely not. He's shocked when he sees him.
Yeah, I mean, it's just weird, though, because it's like, is it the implication that, like, he was too high earlier?
I think so, yeah. Because that's the other
know
thing,
where
like,
he was.
surely he'd remember. But, yeah, and also he's being driven around. He's not, like, driving himself, so, like...
You're not taking any locations quite as much.
Exactly, yeah. But Alonzo kills Roger. He wants Jake to do it. And then they do this whole setup of like, let's make it look legit. You came through the door, you took fire, so that he has to shoot Roger's gun at his friend and he accidentally shoots him and all this sort of stuff. And then afterwards he's like, fine.
I mean, but the whole thing with bulletproof vests is they can only take one bullet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, they're risking this very much.
They're not good cops. I think, so in this whole scene, like, Roger is like really calm throughout all of this. Like, he's not that shocked. He's more like irritated than he is like furious. And do you know what I think he can weirdly pull off is this kind of white guy talking a bit black kind of thing in a way that I don't think many people can pull off, and it's not wise to even attempt it. But I think he sort of makes it work when he's talking about the streets and all this different stuff. I don't know. Maybe Scott Glenn is just a charismatic enigma, but it kind of works for me. And like him taking it all in stride, and he's laughing right up until he actually gets shot. Like even when they're talking about, you should shoot him, and Jake goes, he like aims the gun and he's like boom and stuff like that. And then when he actually, it's like, does he really think? Does he think he's going to get out of this fine? Like,
I think he does think he's going to get out of this. I think the whole thing is him watching Alonzo kind of like play Jake on this kind of thing. Is him going like, he's just sticking around and he's going to let me live and I'll just go to prison for a little bit.
We get the it's not what you know, it's what you can prove line, which will be repeated later. When Jake is like refusing to go along with it, Alonzo like does this little impression of what the news coverage will be like when Jake is killed and all of that. And I think possibly my favourite instance of things coming back, this is almost word for word what is said about Alonzo at the end of the movie. I think that's really smart.
This is my first kind of like big query with the movie, which is, so they do this big bust, they call in the other cops. Obviously the cops come in and they must kind of shrug off the fact that like, even though they say shots fired, it's all happened in the last 5 minutes, they managed to dig a hole in the kitchen and dig up all the drugs.
That's true.
But it's more about the fact that like any police officer who has
in any way been in a firearm incident,
in a firearm fight, would be taken away for
questioning by the DAs and internal affairs and
like psyche val and stuff like that. And yet
this is the whole Hollywood's like what cops are like thing. Definitely for sure. Like, I don't think police realism was a high.
Sure, but the movie kind of tries to have its cake and eat it because they're just like, you're going to have to do a blood test and you're going to prove positive for PCP.
Yeah, because Jake turns the gun and is like, trying to turn this situation, and then Alonzo, like him flipping it back around. He tries to justify it all and everything, but he flips it back around by going like, you're going to be piss tested and you were smoking PCP this morning and I can help you if you go along with this. But this is how he is throughout. He tries multiple avenues. Like, he tries to just reason with him and be like, he's not going to do it, it's all fine. And then when that's clearly not true, it's like, all right, fine, I'll make the threat instead. And that does work. But that's how Alonzo is throughout the whole thing. He just runs through his little playbook of options. It's like, all right, 1 didn't work, let's go to 2. All right, now let's try 3.
So this is where we get, like, the other members of the gang try and turn on Jake, because Jake holds the gun to Alonzo's head after he kills Roger, and Alonzo manages to talk Jake out of killing him. Jake punches Dr. Dre in the face.
Thank you, Ethan Hawke.
But then we go to the car, and this is where we start to get, like, how sincere is Alonzo being, because we get this long speech about how he's going to help him with the piss test and all these other things, and why it's a bad idea to not have him on his side and stuff like that.
How Roger is, like, one of the biggest drug dealers in LA, and he sold weed to kids, and...
But then we immediately shift into Alonzo driving Jake to his death.
Yeah, and, like, he actually, if you pay attention, he's on the phone in the car, and he's, like, knocks on the roof to tell Jake to get in. He's saying something about make sure the bathtub is clean, and it's like, you won't have any clue what that means unless you've seen the movie already. But this is probably my favourite little scenelet, is when Alonzo takes him to, like, this Hispanic gang neighbourhood, ostensibly to drop off food and electronics, which is something he told him about earlier, that he takes stuff to witnesses and families of witnesses and victims and stuff. And, he's like, I'm just gonna take a piss, but then he's just left him there to be killed by these people. And, like, the uncomfortable silence of the poker scene, they do the whole let's play Cypress Hill and have all these, like, real vicious looking thugs, like, mean mugging at camera and stuff like that, and they head inside. But it's when all the music is gone and Jake is just in the kitchen with these 3, and he's trying to be cool about it. And I think Ethan Hawke does a really good job here of, apparently Fuqua, like, gave this trio of actors some instructions that he didn't make Ethan Hawke privy to, so they're, like, saying and doing things that he wasn't aware of, because he wanted this to look really, really uncomfortable, and it is. And I think it's probably the most successfully directed scene in the film of just these 3. Like, it starts off kind of friendly, and then it's like, we're gonna fuck with you a little bit, but then we're gonna still be friendly, and then it fucking turns.
Yeah, like, everything kind of, like, elevates up to each other, which is, like, it helps that you've got 3 quite charismatic actors. Like, Cliff Curtis is really good in this scene, Raymond Cruz is really good in this scene.
Famous Hispanic man Cliff Curtis, who has also played a Middle Eastern man at least once in his career.
Yes, Cliff Curtis is ambiguously ethnic.
Yes. People don't know what Maori-ish New Zealand people are, so they can be anything.
But no, they're all really, really good, and you kind of get this snowballed across the entire scene, which is like, I want to see your gun, and he goes like, oh, is it like this gun? And then
yeah, and then, like, okay, and he, like, flips the bullet out. I guess he's trying to, like, be like, hey, look, I could fuck you all up if I needed to. But
then he's also doing it because I'm going to hand you this gun, I don't want you to have it loaded. But he shoots him in the arse because they know that he's going to take the bullet out, so they take the bullets off of him and keep them away from him.
And
so
they're, like, playing piggy in the middle, like, they're tossing him around the kitchen and stuff, and then... But they do end up giving him the gun back.
He's got the 1 bullet, but that's all he's got. But obviously he doesn't have time to fire it. He does the whole, like, knees the table into Raymond Cruz's face and punches Cliff Curtis, but there's no way he's getting out of there.
No. Realising the car is gone, and, Alonzo's just been gone for a long time, and then he realises the car's gone, and then it's like, right. He doesn't freak out, like, he does try and he's got to be mentally, like, calculating what the fuck do I do, and for it to go from there, and, like, Smiley reveals the stuff with the Russians and how Alonzo, like, killed a dude in Las Vegas, and now he owes $1 million to the mafia, essentially, so they won't kill him. So, we finally get the reveal on that, and it's like Smiley knows a suspicious amount about all of this, but who knows, it gets more and more uncomfortable. But, like, the thing that saves Jake, like, they drag into this bathtub and they have a shotgun and everything, and, like, they find on his person the wallet of the girl that he prevented from being raped earlier, and, like, Smiley calls her, and she's his cousin, which is convenient as fuck.
I mean, yeah, like, I don't mind how convenient it is, because movies like this operate so often on coincidence being, like, a saving point. I do quibble the execution. Like, I wish it wasn't quite how they performed it in this, which is like,
the nonchalance of her being like, oh yeah, I think they were going to rape me or something. Oh well, lol. It's
like I would prefer it if he dragged her around and there was, like, some kind of, like, face-to-face thing rather than just on the phone, her just kind of going like, da-da-da-da-da. It was like, I wish there was something a little bit more to it. Like
I wish she was there in person, like visibly recognizing him immediately to sort of, I kind of feel that was not as nuanced as it could have been, but
it does its job well. It gets us into the last act of the movie, but it is just one of those things where it's like, it's not that I mind what you've done, I just wish you'd done it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that Jake has to get the fucking bus after this. Like, he's just sitting on a bus playing with a gun. It's like, okay, I mean, I guess we're in South Central, but whatever. So he, because he's a dumbass, goes back to the jungle where he was told never to go without Alonzo.
I like the assumption that he knows that. So obviously, like, this is Alonzo's mistress. He presumably has a actual wife elsewhere in the city. He assumes that Alonzo will go to the jungle, which I just find it interesting. Like, he's already done his ban with the mistress. Surely he's going to go home to his actual wife and actual child.
Maybe Smiley told him. I don't fucking know. But yeah, it is a little bit like, So he confronts Alonzo. They get in a big shootout. They get in a big fight. Alonzo basically kicks his ass, but not fully. But the whole thing of Jake being allowed safe passage in, because, Alonzo claims that, all these people respect me or whatever, but they all fucking hate him. They see that Jake is there to kill him, so they let him go inside, and he is allowed entry into the apartment because the kid remembers him and everything. We established Jake is the one that is, like, trying to protect the kid, and Alonzo, even though this is his fucking son, he ends up exploiting it and trying to use it against Jake, and he doesn't actually seem overly... I mean, I'm sure it would bother him if his son was shot, but, like, his priority is himself here. And Eva Mendes did not need to be naked here. But
I was literally about to raise that.
Never mind that, I guess.
It's just like... because Alonzo isn't naked.
No.
He is almost fully dressed.
It probably would have been a more artistic statement to have a naked Alonzo here, but...
I'm pretty sure Denzel commands a paycheck enough to not do a full frontal scene.
I'm sure he does, and I'm upset that Eva Mendes does not, but, whatever. We all make our own choices. No one's saying she was forced into it, but...
We went through the credits afterwards, and she gets a split title card with the person who plays Lisa Hoyt, which...
Yes, who is in one scene. Or technically two, I guess, but whatever. He does the it's not what you know, it's what you can prove thing again, and he points out you have no fucking witnesses, like Smiley and all these different people, like none of them are going to fucking testify, so even if you you can't prove any of this shit, like this will all bounce off me. And Jake has the gun on him, and he's like having him put all the weapons away and everything, but he still manages to turn that around, and they get in this huge fight, and Alonzo kicks his ass basically, but then he jumps off the fucking roof onto his car as he's trying to drive away, which makes him crash. Alonzo is attempting to drive to meet the Russians and give them all this money he seized from Roger, and they end up surrounded by all the gang members, and Jake shoots him in the ass and takes the money and walks away and leaves him ostensibly to be killed by the gang members, because the way Alonzo tries to turn it, it's like, you can't take a life, can you? You can't kill. And like, I love that he puts on the medallion, like his little, that he never fucking wears because of how he presents himself to the world, but he puts on his little police shield, and he's like, go on, shoot me right here, shoot me in the head, knowing I'm a cop and all that. But Alonzo manages to talk his way out of it in the the big money scene that they play in all the Denzel Washington montages and all this shit. But
it's a good monologue.
It is, and he improvised that line of King Kong ain't got shit on me and all this stuff. It's really good. Like, this is the scene where you can see why he won the Oscar, really. I mean, there's moments all throughout. He didn't win it just for this scene, but he goes through it all here. Like, he's cocky at first, like him picking up the cigarettes instead of the gun, and like talking through what's going to happen, and then reacting to the pain of the bullet and being like angry about it. Oh, you motherfucker, you shot me in the ass and stuff like that. And
it's very much, the Oscars don't necessarily nominate best acting. It's kind of most acting,
of course. Yes.
He definitely is doing the most acting.
He sure
in this
is.
Movie.
And him threatening all of the thugs, seeming like he's got it all in hand, but then every third word he's like, Jake! And he's like to the end trying to make sure he's going to come back for it.
I kind of wish that the gang members did kill him.
Kind of, yes.
In this scene, I kind of wish that was the payoff, which is you get and I can picture it in my head, like, because a million movies have done it, of Jake walking away and you get the
gunshot in the background.
The gunshot in the background.
Towards camera.
Yeah, like, I mean, obviously it's overdone, but it feels so much more earned than what they do.
Yeah, Yeah, and like he's like, I'm winning anyway, and he's laughing, and then you see the laughter like drain from his face again. Good stuff. But
it's just moments like when Eva Mendes takes her son away from the window and stuff like that because she doesn't want him to see this.
Yeah.
And then we don't get any payoff to her. He's humiliated.
The version that Denzel read before he agreed to this, Alonzo gets away with everything, and he flees this scene, and he doesn't get hilariously shot to death by the Russians one scene later. And he insisted, he was like, I will only do this movie if Alonzo dies or gets his comeuppance. And it's like, I feel it would have been a lot better if he was killed here in what he thought was his environment and like, you know, what he thought he was running, instead of just some unknown Russians who just rock up at an intersection in the middle of the night and just shoot him to death and drive off. And it's like, I get that they're like, you know, oh, the Russians can do anything, they're above the law, like they're fucking crazy. But yeah, I think it would have been, and I know this scene of him like talking them all down with nothing but threats when they have all the fucking leverage, it's like, yeah, that's great, but like, what if someone killed him anyway afterwards, you know? Like,
yeah, like, I mean, like, 'cause we never see the Russians, and it makes it like, it's not like you need to pay off the Chekhov gun of the Russian mafia being there and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like,
if you were going to do that, you needed to have like a Russian character like be in the film somewhere as like a looming threat, but to just have them rock up as, I mean, they're not a Deus Ex Machina because they're mentioned throughout, but like, it just doesn't feel, there's no emotional connection there in the way that there would have been if he was killed by someone in the you know, one of these gang members.
But I'm also not entirely sold on that Alonzo needed to die. Like, I understand being in like 2001, you want to paint a picture of like, this is a bad cop. Mm-hmm. He needs to be punished. Yeah. But I think there's kind of like a more damning or interesting ending where Alonzo just carries on doing this.
Yeah. And like, Jake just pities him and like requests a fucking transfer or whatever.
Yeah, like that feels like so much more of like a stab in the gut, which is like, it doesn't matter that Jake confiscated the $1 million and all these other little things. Like, obviously you have to figure out some way around the Russian situation and all the rest of it, but like,
don't do it.
just don't do it. But like,
just have Alonzo rob Roger because he wants some money instead of like needing desperately some cash.
Yeah, it's just that thing where it's just like that kind of damning indictment of like the corruption within the police force, that this man could continue to operate after this rookie training officer. It's kind of horrible. But again, it's the kind of thing that, and I'm gonna name another piece of media that deals with police officers dealing with drug enforcement now. It's kind of the thing that The Wire would have done, which is that the corrupt police officer carries on going whilst the good,
the cynical and damning and making you think about it ending, instead of just, and neatly, this is over. Goodbye, Alonzo.
Yeah,
off goes Jake.
I mean, it's not 100% neat because like, what's Jake's going to have to do the piss test and he's going to test positive for PCP.
Yeah,
he's just walked home with $1 million in a bag.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, no matter what happens, the man he spent all day with got murdered by the Russians.
I mean, potentially Alonzo's five dudes don't stick up for him now. He's dead, and they go and they.
And also, they never got a cut of the money that they were promised.
I said how like Ethan Hawke doesn't embarrass himself as like the white boy in this like very black movie. The end here is the only part where it kind of bothers me that it's a little bit white saviory. It's like, hey white dude, you're okay. You've befriended us, this like very scary gang. Off you go. And it's like, there is that sort of white savior that Jake is the one that like prevails over all this, but then Alonzo does spend a decent portion of this film trying to exploit Jake's whiteness, I think. Like, I feel, I'm not saying like he had any sway in who his recruit was, but I think Jake being white certainly helped his plan as he envisioned it. So I guess they can kind of get away with it because they do try and like use Jake's whiteness against him, and then for it to not go as Alonzo planned, I think that's fine. But it is a tiny bit like, oh, and the white guy of course prevails. But then, as I said, I really do like that ending of him getting home at the end of the day, and the news report is about Alonzo exactly what he said it would be about Jake if he he's survived by his wife and blah blah blah, blah.
Yeah, on a macro level, the script really works. It feels not cyclical, but like everything that you need paying off. That no scene feels like wasted at the end of the day.
No,
which is kind of like there's nothing in there that you go like, that is the easy cut. That is the 20 minutes of the movie that you can cut out and make it leaner and tighter. Like, everything pays off.
Yeah, it's either Denzel doing some very showy acting, or it's funny, or it's dickish, or it's something that is going to pay off later. Like, it's all there and it all works. And yeah, I mean, this is a movie. Ultimately, this is about the powerhouse performance of Denzel, and that is the legacy of the movie is Denzel's performance here.
I think it's interesting that, like, obviously we've done as I said, like 2 very focused movies, but like this is an example of a movie which is entirely elevated by its star. If this movie had cast the wrong person, then...
Which, I told you the names, so it would have all been wrong.
We probably wouldn't be talking about this movie. No. And I think that's what makes this so fascinating, which is that like this could have been bog standard, pot boiler, corrupt cop wheeling around town, but instead you get... I'm not going to say like it's an all-time top 5 acting performance, but it's definitely something that like takes what is a quite pulpy script and turns it into something more than.
I would say it is a top 5, top 10 performance of this decade. And,
sure.
And that's why it's on here. That's why I put it forward. And it's, I will never not go to that performance when I think of Denzel's career and I think of this genre of movie and stuff. So that's really what, that's why I've clung on to it throughout my movie watching life, and it's why I was the one to put it forward, and that's why we've been talking about it for the last hour.
I mean, you look at who he's up against, and it's like, it's Russell Crowe for A Beautiful Mind, it's Sean Penn for I Am Sam, Jesus Christ, I'm so glad that movie didn't win. Will Smith for Ali, Tom Wilkinson for In the Bedroom. Like, it is maybe Will Smith as Ali is Will Smith's best performance of his career, but like Denzel is the only one of that list that you go like, that is still a performance that people talk about.
It's meme worthy, it's Academy worthy, it is commercial performance worthy. Like, this is something that Denzel Washington was obviously already a big name. Like, he's been putting up big performances for decades, literally. And I don't think this wasn't necessarily like his biggest commercial hit, but it's certainly something that it's a card he can sort of play whenever he wants. And like,
what is his biggest commercial hit? I'm intrigued now.
The Equalizer probably somehow made more money than this. I don't know, but
his highest-grossing movie domestically is American Gangster.
Of course. Hey, let's settle this beef between Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington by teaming them up.
Training Day is number 15 domestically on his all-time.
Well, there you go. But I still feel it is a card that he can trade off for the rest of his career. And
oh yeah, I mean, like he did deserve that Oscar based on like who he was nominated up against, and I can't imagine there's anyone else from 2001 that you kind of put in there. Like, I'm not going to say like, oh, I think Jake Gyllenhaal should have got a nomination for Donnie Darko or something like that. It's
and there are better written movies that didn't make this list than this. There are better directed movies that didn't make this list than this, but there are not a lot of performances of this level that didn't make this list, and that's why it's here, and that's Training Day, I guess, unless you have any final thoughts on it.
No, I think unless you want to say like, did you watch the TV show?
I didn't watch a second of the TV show. I didn't even consider watching the TV show.
I mean, rest in peace, Bill Paxton.
Of course.
But just reading it like 15 years after the events of the film, it's in continuity with the movie.
What? Is someone playing someone's son?
Nope, I don't think there's anyone involved in the movie.
Then why is it? Surely it's just a loose premise type. Whatever. We're not here to talk about the Training Day TV show. Next week, we will be talking about a very different movie, Ocean's 11. Another Matt pick. It's been a Matt-heavy early portion of this list, and we will get into some Ben stuff. I mean,
this is when Ben is like 8 years old. We're talking about at the moment. Like, this is not peak Ben knowing what movies are like. Period.
This is a movie that Matt remembers the trailers coming out for and it being a big deal. So that's how old Matt fucking is at this point.
I mean, like we said at the top of this episode, this movie is the 5th highest grossing movie of 2001. This is still to this day like one of Clooney's like highest grossing films, but that is for next week.
That is for next week. We will be talking about Ocean's 11 next week. This has been There Will Be Movies. Go to entertherealworld.com, go to soundcloud.com/Mike and Matt, check out everything we've got going on. We're taping these well in advance, so I don't know what to really promote, but we will be back next week with Ocean's 11. Ben, are you able to ascertain, will there be movies?
I think there will be movies.
Okay, for now we're going to tentatively confirm there will be movies. Thank you and goodbye. And I did it for so long, I got nothing to show.